Welcome everybody to Tales from the Jar Side, the video series. Don't have time to read my newsletter? That's okay. I'll be happy to read it to you. The title this week is Welcome Newcomers, from JVM Weekly, by the way. Connecting ChatGPT to Java. Groovy has a milestone birthday, and the usual collection of silly tweets and toots. The subtitle is, I accidentally glued myself to a copy of my autobiography. My wife doesn't believe me, but that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. The rim shot's not working this week. I don't know why. Welcome to Tales from the Jar Side. Welcome, fellow jarheads. The Cousin IT newsletter for the week of August 20th through 27th, 2023. Today's the 28th. This week I taught a reactive Spring course on the O'Reilly Learning Platform and a Spring-dated JPA course as an NFJS virtual workshop. Regular readers of and listeners to, and of course video viewers of this newsletter are affectionately known as jarheads and are far more intelligent, sophisticated, and attractive than the average newsletter reader or listener or viewer. If you wish to become a jarhead, please subscribe using the included button. That's my cue to take a look at the YouTube channel and see how we're doing over there, so let me open that up. From the link, I can see that we are up to 636 subscribers. That's pretty good. I think a lot of that was contributed by the newcomers that just came in, and I will address them in a moment. As long as I'm here, the significant new video this week is this one, the one called AI Projects in Java, Talk to ChatGPT. You can see I used a thumbnail very similar in look and appearance to the last video that was not a newsletter video. What I did is I went to Midjourney and I generated a robot again, running as fast as it can, and used that as the overall thumbnail. Now you can see here I've created a playlist for these couple of AI related videos, and I put that right at the top. So I'm going to add a couple more to that, certainly before I go on to other things. Okay, let's go back to the newsletter. This section is called Welcome JVM Weekly Subscribers. Last week I mentioned the excellent newsletter JVM Weekly. It really is very, very good. Here's a link to the latest issue, and when I put that link inside the newsletter, it rendered a little summary here. Of course, since they're both hosted on Substack, I probably shouldn't be surprised that it does that. There's a little read more button and everything. I think if I click on it, it goes there. Unfortunately, it used up this same tab. So at any rate, there's his thumbnail. Boy, he does a good job with that. I might have to imitate that little process there. Written by Artur Skoronsky, at least I'm assuming that's how his name is pronounced. It covers the under-the-hood details of the Java language and the Java virtual machine, getting into features that are way beyond what I know and understand. In the last issue, he was kind enough to recommend Tales from the Jar Side to his readers, which I was kind of blown away by, to be honest. That was very generous of him. That did result in a flood of new subscribers here, and by flood, I mean, I don't know, 8, 10, 12, 15? Seemed like a lot to me, which was very nice. I want to welcome you all. If you're one of the new people, thank you very much for joining, and you're welcome to stay. If it turns out you're not interested in what I'm doing, I understand that too. That's perfectly fine. Let me know what you think. It does mean that Artur and I now are sharing a handful of subs, so that reminded me of this little scene in the Gamesters of Triskelion. Provider 1 bids 300 quatlus for the newcomers. Yeah. I don't know if 300 quatlus doesn't feel like enough, so I raised the bid to 500 and see what that happens. But you may recall this line from the same original series episode, 5,000 quatlus that the newcomers will have to be destroyed. To which I said, wow, that escalated quickly. I'm sure it won't come to that, or at least I'm pretty sure. Growing up, my sister, who was also the Trek fan in the family, and I used to bid quatlus for pretty much everything. 1,000 quatlus for the last corn muffin, although I should have thrown in the Provider 1 bids 1,000 quatlus or whatever. And we did that at least until Babylon 5 came along and we switched to credits. I'm sure one of us owes the other literally millions of these FCUs, the fictional currency units at this point. After the newsletter went out, I contacted her, I texted her and told her she was in the newsletter, and she said, should I be worried? And I said, absolutely, but no. And she read this section and informed me that the actual amount isn't $1 million, it's 674,000 some. But she didn't say whether I owed her or she owed me, so I just said, I'm sure you're good for it. We left it at that. Honestly, I don't think either of us have thought of that in-joke from our family in, 40 years. Anyway, since the JVM Weekly said nice things about my newsletter, I felt obligated to read this week's issue of the JVM newsletter. And it was one of those really deep ones getting into the under the hood stuff that I don't understand at all. Now, I'm glad he's doing this because that way I can find out about that without having to dive into the JEPs, as they say, directly. JEP is a Java enhancement proposal. I don't really want to dig into the spec. He does all that, and that's very helpful. That way I'm aware of important developments in that area without having to fight the JVM equivalent of any thralls. Thralls being the alien species in Gamesters of Triskelion. The most surprising thing about this entire section of the newsletter is that the spell checker inside Substack's editor somehow had no problem with the word quatloose. Go figure. I don't know what that means, but it feels like it should mean something. Next section. I did mention already that the newest video this week is called Connecting ChatGPT from Java, or connecting to ChatGPT from Java. So this week I put up that video. You see, this is the robot that I created in Midjourney. Added the little OpenAI logo on top of it, or maybe, I wanted the ChatGPT logo, but it seemed right to put it in as OpenAI. Again, I'm not great at marketing, so I'm not sure this is a great thumbnail the way it is, although I do like the pretty colors. So the key idea is basically, look, it's just another RESTful web service as far as we're concerned. So that means if it provides a RESTful web service API, and it does through this OpenAI API, then you just register and get a key, add it as an environment variable so that you can read it and put it in the header of every request. Use some Java networking client to connect to the service with GET or POST requests. I use the HTTP client that was built into Java 11, and then parse the JSON data. You have to generate it on the way out and parse it on the way back. I use Java records for all that. Worked really, really well. I use Google's JSON to do the parsing for me and generation. I had some issues which I didn't really get into, but I may get into in a future video, mostly having to do with dealing with enums, because the parsers aren't wild about understanding how to convert enums. But at any rate, it all worked pretty well. That video started to get long, so I didn't get into the more interesting details. I did discover, however, today I found out that at the Spring One conference last week, which I mentioned in last week's newsletter, they announced a new project at Spring called Spring AI. Now the version is like 0.2. We are seriously an alpha version of this thing. And yeah, it in fact looks a lot like what I'm doing. Yeah, here's the homepage for the Spring AI project. You see the version is 0.2.0 snapshot. So we're talking early here. And if you take a look at the details of this, like if you look at the concepts and everything, then they were much more thorough than I was. They went into all the different functional features of the OpenAI API. And they did do one specifically on OpenAI. Their example, like mine, is on GPT 3.5. I don't know that they have a key for 4 either. They also have a version that runs on Microsoft Azure. Not a huge surprise, I guess, but there it is. They claim they're going to have others as well, but none of that is available. If you look at the getting started, they say go register and get a key. And look, they did what I did. They made it an environment variable and retrieved it that way. What I found interesting, however, when I looked at this, is that they did not use records, interestingly enough. What I mean by that is you can see, by the way, the documentation here has a lot of, TBD stuff in it, to be developed, determined, written, whatever. Here's the GitHub project, and I was digging into some of the classes. See, there's a Spring AI core and a Spring AI Open AI, and I did spent some time on it. And they didn't use records, but they did use abstract classes, and that's probably why you don't want to use records, because if they want to put records in an inheritance hierarchy, you can't. Records are final, and records already have a superclass, that being java.lang.record. The way to put records together is with sealed interfaces, because you can make your record implement a sealed interface and then have a collection of the sealed interface type, and they will all be the different records. But that's not record patterns, and the pattern matching that goes with that isn't even official yet. While you can do sealed interfaces, you can't do pattern matching for switch with them. In 21, you will be able to, and record patterns are coming in 21 as well. And then we'll see how all that evolves. I do find this an interesting project. I am going to keep an eye on it, but I'm glad I got a couple videos out beforehand because otherwise, oh well. The other thing I want to mention about this whole phenomenon is I talked to my friend Paul King about doing the same sort of thing in Groovy. And Paul King is the head of the Groovy project. And he, of course, worked everything up with Micronaut's HTTP test client. And he had to do almost zero work to get this to work. And I'm going to do the same thing probably this week if I can find time. I'm going to use Spring Boot's HTTP interfaces and see if I can work out the exact same system that I did without Spring, and see if I can get that to happen. And I'll have to comment on what's going on in the Spring AI project. Anyway, that's all the documentation. All the information is in this section of the newsletter. The other interesting part of the video is that I consistently used the AI assistant inside of IntelliJ IDEA to refactor the code, to suggest alternative naming ideas, and to do all the git commit messages, which I really like. So that's really nice. There is a link here to the GitHub repository online. I should warn you, it does not exactly match what's in the video, mostly because the video I'm kind of live coding and making some changes, and it's also simpler. This has everything in it, all the different examples I'm going to do, from OpenAI and PicoGen and Stability AI directly, that's Stable Diffusion, all of that stuff in there. So it's a lot more fleshed out than what I have in the video. Eventually, I hope to have enough videos that I'll cover pretty much everything in that API. Incidentally, I do have a PDF file in the GitHub repository that was the one I used as the slides in my No Fluff Just Stuff webinar a couple weeks ago. So letting you know that's there as well. Back to the newsletter. This week was a big milestone for the Groovy programming language. There was a little post on Mastodon, a toot, I suppose, from the Apache Groovy feed. It says, "Happy birthday to Groovy. After over 2 billion downloads, 2 billion downloads." That's actually true. That's a real statistic. 240 releases, 40,000 plus commits, one of which, is mine. Anyway, over 450 contributors. Next Monday, that was this morning, Groovy turns 420, and join a few of us virtually for a casual meet and greet to celebrate the occasion. There's a live interactive session where we'll chat about all things Groovy. Everyone's invited. So I went to that. Guillaume Laforge was there, who was the head of the project for many years. Paul King was there, who's the head now. Graham Roche put in a brief appearance. Puneet Bell. There were several other people were there, and it was fun to hang out with everybody and tell some stories and answer some questions and see how things are going. Nobody asked me why there weren't any more editions of the Groovy podcast, although if you look at the link I have here in the newsletter, there's the homepage, the hosted page for the Groovy podcast. It still lists me with Baruch Sadegurski, even though I don't think he's been actively involved with the Groovy podcast for a couple of years. We do have a list here that shows that the most recent one was at the end of March of this year. We are about to head into September, so, well, maybe it's time for another one. Did get that nice little logo created. I didn't talk much about that yet, but that was a friend of mine. I actually hired an artist to do that, and I paid him myself, and I'm very happy I did that. These days, somebody probably tried to use Midjourney to do it. I have to say, the whole thing is kind of bittersweet for me. My IT career, I was in engineering and research before I moved to IT. My IT career pretty much began with Java. I jumped from Fortran to Java, believe it or not. That was quite a leap. And that happened in the mid-90s. And I used Java pretty steadily for several years after that. It got me my first IT-related job, teaching training classes and everything. I encountered Groovy around 2007, 2008, that time frame. I think Ruby on Rails hit the Java dinosaur world like a comet, like an asteroid, I suppose, back in around 2007. And I tried to learn Ruby, but I wasn't ready. It wasn't the sort of thing I could just pick up easily myself. I could do it now, but back then it was too big a leap. But a year later, when Grails came along, well, I already knew something about Spring. I already knew something about Hibernate. I knew the concepts from Ruby on Rails. I was pretty much the target audience. So in order to learn Grails, I started learning Groovy, and the rest, at least for the next 5 to 10 years, was history. I really enjoyed it. Groovy was kind of my first love. Everybody in that community was so incredibly kind and generous. I can't tell you how many times I'd write a blog post showing some problem I solved using Groovy, and some core team member would drop by and say, "Oh, hey, very nice. You could cut the amount of code you wrote in half by doing this," or something like that. And that's how we all learned it. And I went to a lot of the early Groovy conferences, GreatConf. My first keynote was at a GreatConf in Copenhagen. I got to visit Copenhagen a couple times because of that. I went to GreatConf in Minneapolis a couple times. I even got to go to GreatConf in Delhi. That's the one that was the one and only time they held GreatConf in India. That was my first trip to India ever. So that was great. I really had a wonderful time with all of that. It's just hard to not acknowledge that Groovy's moment it has passed. It's a shame because it's still really, really good and really, really powerful and has lots of things in it that Java doesn't have. And it's still an active project. It's an Apache project these days, so it releases under the Apache Aegis, the framework. They're working on Groovy 5. It's only an alpha version right now, but 4 has been out for a few years. But if it was ever going to achieve widespread adoption, and for a brief moment it looked like it was going to, that moment has certainly passed. That's part of the reason I have trouble making new Groovy podcasts. It's the pace of change isn't all that rapid anyway anymore because there are very few companies sponsoring Groovy development. And if nobody's sponsoring it, it's hard to justify the time. Everybody has to do it on their own time. But these days, if I ever get contacted to do Groovy training, it's usually either someone maintaining old code or maybe even leaving Groovy to go to something else. They want to figure it out. It's kind of disappointing. These things come and go. It's just the way life is. But maybe it'll have a revival. Grails, I found my old Grails shirt, so that worked. That's still active out there. Grails 6 came out recently. Micronaut is an active framework. They released Micronaut 4 about a month ago. That's doing very well. Gradle tries to pretend they didn't come from Groovy. I'm not sure why, but they don't. But that was a Groovy project. It was an offshoot from Groovy. But I had made so many friends in that community. Oh, and the Spock framework, of course, is still fantastic. I tried to use Jeb. Jeb I like, but Jeb is... Jeb, G-E-B, here, this is the website for that, is browser automation. And they have this really nice page model and everything. It's a really good way to drive the browser programmatically. So I liked what I got, but I'm not a front-end person. So I kept running into that barrier. I don't quite follow how it thinks in many cases. But very powerful, way better than writing raw Selenium code, certainly. But there were people I mentioned, like Paul King, Graham Roche, Guillaume Laforge, Andre Salmire, Cedric Champeau, several others. I think Mr. Hockey, Hubert Klein, Ink, I get his name wrong. He was there this morning as well, and Puneet Bell and a few others. So that was fun, but kind of bittersweet. I may redo my project. Paul King redid his my project using Groovy. I may do a video about that too. Let's move on to our tweets and toots. Actually, this time it's called Toots and Skeets, although I did include an actual couple of tweets again. There's still people to follow over on Twitter, even if the site itself is a disaster. More wisdom from cartoonist Tom Gauld. The woman there, who presumably is the author, said, "I thought you were getting me a 6-figure deal for this book." And the agent is saying, well, it is 6 figures if we include the pound sign, the decimal point, and the 2 zeros at the end, which that would add up to 1, 2, 3, 4. And then all that's left is, if you can see this, 89 pounds. So I got to say, most of my books didn't have an advance at all. But then again, an advance is an advance on earnings. You have to earn that out anyway. All of my books are so-called in the black. They do earn money. And my first book, the Making Java Groovy book, which is now 10 years old, believe it or not. I think its 10-year anniversary will be in September. Still earns, I don't know, $30, $35 every 3-4 months, something like that. Yeah, don't give up your day job. I usually tell people the economics of technical books can be summed up this way. If you buy one of my books, I can buy a cup of coffee, but not at Starbucks. And that's about right. I figure I make on the order of $2, maybe $2.50 per book sale, something like that. And that may be on the high end. So you don't write a book for the money. If you're going to, there's better ways to make money, believe me. And then I did this. I can't believe I did this. I missed it completely. That estimate is correct for all 6 of my books, and then proceeded to list 5. I mean, I forgot one of my own books. You know, Making Java Groovy, sure. Gradle Recipes for Android, okay. Kotlin Cookbook, Modern Java Recipes, Makito Made Clear. The one I forgot is my Managing Your Manager book, the one called Help Your Boss Help You. I mean, I had to stare at this list and think, what book am I forgetting? And I spent a year on that thing. I usually spend a year or more writing these things, and oh God, I'm getting old, I guess. I'll call it a senior moment and move on. Totally unrelated, but this has been coming up a lot lately as the Dodgers have visited the Red Sox this week. There was a tweet from Bill Simmons, who's the sports guy, and I used to follow him very actively, and when I dropped by Twitter, he was tweeting again. The Red Sox put real thought into Mookie leaving, that's Mookie Betts. The history of expensive hitters tailing off in their 30s psyched them out. They completely discounted what a unique and exceptional athlete Mookie is and what a special guy he is. It's the dumbest Boston trade of my lifetime. I would go further than that. They had the best player that Boston has had pretty much since Babe Ruth. And they had him young and in his prime and decided they couldn't afford him. The Boston Red Sox decided they couldn't afford a player. I'm still appalled by that notion. I mean, what are they doing with that money otherwise? Keeping it? I mean, come on. It's for a guy like that. And of course, he just had a brilliant weekend when the Dodgers visited Boston and he just hit the cover off the ball. Because of course he did. And he plays brilliant defense. Let's move on. I get mad every time I think about it. I didn't want to get into politics in any serious way, but I did like some of the gags that came out of these things for the indictments that came in. This was pretty good from that J.R.R. Jokin rather than Tolkien Twitter feed. So sad you could already see the ones in the lower pictures turning into wraiths. Yeah, somebody ought to talk to them about their lighting there. Other captions for that same figure that I saw, it says, but they were all of them deceived, for another indictment was filed, you know. Or speak, fiend, and enter. And the password is, so I'm not even going to try to pronounce that mess. Or one crime to rule them all. Or the Injustice League And then, of course, the Brady Bunch one, till the one day when the Kraken met this fellow, and they knew that they barely had a hunch, but they'd meet at Four Seasons Landscaping. That's the way they all became the Rudy Bunch, or the Shady Bunch, I thought might be better. You decide how you want it. I thought they were funny. I'm just going to stick with the funny part and move on. Well, except for this. I couldn't believe Trump reported his height and weight as 6'3", 215. Yeah, so am I. By that scale. Yeah, so I like this image here. I did grab the Zoom background that somebody prepared from the sheriff's office there for when people were getting their mugshot taken. I did open in the Groovy meeting this morning with that, but I switched it pretty quickly. We'll see if it cracks anybody up as we're going. This one says, didn't see that coming, and they're using a Ouija board and spelling out ALIVE and alive. Is it saying it's alive? I don't know. Let's keep going. STAYINALIVE. Sheesh, this is a BG board, not a Ouija board. And if I had my rim shot working, I would click on it right there. Seriously dated joke. I mean, that would be a good joke in the 70s, 80s, you know? But okay, if you get it, great. It cracked up my wife, and that's what I was after. This is a Mastodon toot. It said, and I said, and they lived happily ever after. The toot says, deleting my dating apps because I want to meet someone the old-fashioned way. Parentheses, I am a goat that wants to cross over a bridge. He is a troll that asked me to answer his riddles 3. Yeah, but was it AI assisted? I thought all these these dating apps have to use AI these days, right? Marketing. This toot was about Xena versus Hercules. Said one of the most important insights to come out of the COVID pandemic is that Xena is so much better than Hercules. Definitely including the actors on there. Amen to that, yeah. This one I entitled, I'm Afraid I'm Missing Out, and it says, you have FOMO? Must be nice. I wish I had it. Yeah. In the wildly unlikely chance you don't get the reference there, FOMO is short for fear of missing out. And yeah, I'm afraid, one more rim shot, we're all out of FOMO around here. Yeah. And then this last one said, evidence suggests, and this is looks like a New Yorker cartoon. The cartoonist's name is on there, but I don't know where this came from. I only saw it in a post. It says, yes, but how can we be sure the temperature increase was caused by man? And of course they are frogs boiling in a pan, and one frog is pointing to the actual knob on the stove turning up the temperature. Tommy Siegel is the cartoonist. Well, have a great week, everybody. The video version is here now. Last week I did the reactive spring and spring data courses. This week I don't have any courses, but I have a couple of projects I really have to finish, and there'll be a couple more videos. And next week after Labor Day, I begin that undergraduate course in software design at Trinity College in Hartford. So I've got a lot of stuff that I'll be doing, but I'll try to get a couple of new videos out anyway. And in the meantime, let's just say thank you very much for coming. Take care, everybody.